Yeah, well, I guess it's just letting people like me ramble.
I guess. I mean, that's what we
I
do.
don't know.
That's the entire like purpose of this podcast. So
Yeah. Well, I know I can definitely talk a lot. A lot of opinions that I can't share while I'm painting.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
All right, well, today we are joined by Ariel Burgess, who I'm sure most of you know, and if you don't, she was the official Wheel of Time artist for the books for a very, very long time.
8 years.
Well, 8 years.
8 years.
That's a long time.
That is a long time.
Most of my 20s.
Yeah. And just a delight. I've spent some time talking with her at JordanCon and a little bit of time this morning, and I just really enjoy getting your opinions on stuff. I think you've thought a lot about Wheel of Time and in
A
ways
lot,
that
yeah.
a lot ways that not necessarily everyone else has, because you think about it in a very visual way. And so,
Yeah. Well,
So
I
it's an
was a
interesting
fan
perspective.
for quite some time, and I started reading when I was 15, and it's the same age as like Egwene is about when they leave the Two Rivers. And growing up, reading the books, I read up until the last one had come out, and I think it was Knife of Dreams, and then I had to wait like everybody else to read the rest of them. But yeah, I didn't get officially involved until I was 21, and then worked until, how old was I? 29. There we go. Math.
And so, how did you become official? How did that happen?
Fan art. I really love the series, and I was like just constantly, as I was reading the books, like on DeviantArt and on Google, like looking for more fan art and stuff I really liked. And there was so much of it, but there was so much that was like really inaccurate. And I'm a details freak. Just, I mean, you have to be when you love this series. Like you have to love
absolutely.
detail. I want to draw these characters, but I want to draw them like really accurate. And I think the first one I did actually was Rand, like with his arm behind his back and his hand on the sword. And I just wanted him to look down, like smoldering with his big dark circles, just looking tired but young. And just, so I did that. And then I did the three wives, but it was very like comic booky, where they're all too old looking and too sexy looking. And that one like took off. Like I still get people who use it and share it, and Min's outfit looks like a tracksuit, which was accidental, but yeah. I still like see that one a lot. I'm like, it's not a tracksuit. I just wasn't good at texturing.
I remember. I can picture that, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
those
it's like
totally looks
light
like
blue.
tracksuit.
Yeah, it totally does. I was not good at fabrics then, so I was 20, but yeah, I started doing that, and I had a fan like request me to do like a private card deck for them. And so I started doing that, and then got contacted. Like I started doing a Facebook page with them and just kind of sharing it, and people like were like, oh my god, I want this deck like for realsies. And Tavern Teas got notice, and they reached out and they're like, hey, do you want to actually work with us? And I was like, this is a fake email, like. And then they were like, no, really, do you want to work with us? We would like to sign contracts and so forth. And then I like screamed and jumped up and down, and then was like, okay, breathe, email them back. And did. And so I completed the fan thing, and then got finger wagging. I wasn't supposed to be doing that. So, but then we did the official thing, and so I repainted and did entirely new deck of cards with them. And they were like, hey, there's this convention, you want to go? And like, next month. So, and they're like, we're gonna reveal the cards.
What year was that?
2012. Yeah, so they revealed the cards, and me and all of my 5-footness. I'd never been around like fans before, so that was really scary. And I brought my mom because I was like, I don't know these people,
And I've got that deck right over here. It's just off screen. Like it's a great deck of cards. Like great.
Thank you.
The sheer volume and the quality, the combination of both is amazing.
54 cards, 62 characters, and I did that in 3 months.
Wow.
While doing full-time school. was finishing my last year of college. So
Wow.
I finished
That's
work and then I would paint in class,
intense.
like on Photoshop. I remember working on Loyal in like one of my art classes. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was fun. It was so fun to do that. And the process of like having everything reviewed by, I don't know, everything I did with the Wheel of Time was reviewed by 4 people from Tavern Teas and the 3 people from Bandersnatch. So Harriet, Maria, and Alan. So yeah, it was a lot of people whose opinions really mattered on everything I did, but they're all lovely people. So it was really fun working on the series, and I'm sad to not be anymore, but I'm still a fan.
This is Chapter 9 of Crown of Swords, A Pair of Silverpike, and the symbol is the Flame of Tarvalin. And this is a pair of Silverpike, or Nicola and Arenia, clearly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, obviously. And the flame is because this is nothing but White Tower. Well,
And Emerald
Saladar.
Seed. Saladar, White Tower, Emerald
Yeah,
Seed.
It's all Aes Sedai stuff.
Yeah, it's all Aes Sedai stuff.
Right.
And this whole sequence is, we started last chapter, and we've got 3 or 4 chapters, which are basically Egwene's founding her power base.
Yeah.
Right. It's a
So
lot of
getting
character
some Aes
building.
Sedai to swear, getting Gareth Bryn to swear, a few other things like that. Dealing with some of these challenges. So it's a great little sequence.
Right.
Yeah. So much political setup in these chapters.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it. I mean, I was telling Seth earlier, because we talked for like an hour and a half before we're like, we'll just tech test.
Yeah, just quick
Fine.
tech test, and then you get 2 Wheel of Time fans sitting down together. And
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that doesn't happen.
No.
We're detail-oriented people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I love Egwene. She's like my favorite character in the whole book series. I mean, I love a lot of the characters. Perrin was definitely like up there. I really liked him. Matt's actually probably my least favorite. He's interesting. Well, a good character, but it's just, nah. Anyway, I love Egwene.
I feel like my children. It's like, don't ask me to pick one. Like, I love them all, and they're all a pain in my ass sometimes. Don't get me wrong.
I
But I love them
dated
all.
people like Matt, and I think that made me be like, ugh, like,
Fair.
I did that in my 20s. I'm over it, But I love Egwene because we think very similarly, logically, and there was definitely things that I felt frustrated about going back and reading it again. And it's a really good series to read over and over and over, because I read it when I was 15, and then I read it again in my early 20s, and I've read many of the chapters off and on working on the series, having bookmarks, and my eye of the world looks like a fan of little tabs. You get different perspective as you get older.
Yeah.
You change. And for me, I think, as I was describing earlier, one of the things that I got frustrated about with Egwene is, especially with this chapter, she's like a 30-year-old virgin. She's logically minded. She's good at like learning people and their patterns and their habits and all these little puzzles and pieces, but she still struggles with romance. And like the end of the chapter, when she's talking to Leanne, and she's like, I gotta go. There's this guy. I gotta go in the men's camp. And and Egwene is like, what is she, what are Greens doing? I guess she's gonna, like, maybe they're lovers. I don't understand, like, what is this sex thing? Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Are they going to go kiss romantically in a corner somewhere?
yeah, like, oh gosh.
There's a very young girl romanticized version outlook on the world that like all romance is romantic romance.
Right. One, the romance in this series is very like dated. I think I had a lot of trouble with going back, because I loved Suan and Gareth Byrne. Like, I loved them. And then going back and reading it again, like, this is such a 1980s romance where he spanks her when she's bad. And like, the way that it's written is like, no. But yeah, I took lots of notes. So.
Well, I want to get us started. I'm just going to read the first 2 paragraphs just to get us into this thing, and then we can dig into the various statements that people are making. Egwene was sitting in her chair, one of the few real chairs in the camp, with a little plain carving like a farmer's best armchair, roomy and comfortable enough that she felt only a touch of guilt about taking up valuable wagon space for it. She was sitting there trying to pull her thoughts together when Suan swept aside the entry flaps and ducked into the tent. Suan was not happy. "Why in the light did you run off?" Her voice had not changed with her face, and she chided with the best, even when she did it in respectful tones. Barely respectful. Her blue eyes remained the same, too. They could have done for a saddlemaker's awls. Shiriam brushed me aside like a fly. That surprisingly delicate mouth twisted bitterly. She was gone almost as soon as you were. Don't you realize she handed herself to you? She certainly does. Her and Anaya and Morvrin and the lot of them. You can be sure they'll spend tonight trying to bail water and patch holes. They could manage it. I don't see how, but they might. Just gives us a little bit of context that when we last saw them, do you remember the negotiation with Shiriam?
Yeah, this is the reveal of the ferrets, and then we get distracted by Moghedien getting taken away. So this is like, remember, this is the normal politics that were happening before a Forsaken got released.
Right.
I mean, Egwene was right when she brings up that they couldn't guard her heavily. But at the same time, I always felt like they could have done a bit of a better job. They were a little, like, in my mind, it felt like too relaxed. Like, oh, she's collared, and so we have this Forsaken, but she's collared, so she can't really do anything. But, I mean, this woman is ancient.
Right.
And scary. Like, I would not, I'd have eyes on her 24/7.
Yeah, like a little ward on her tent, like Rand puts on Asmodian's room, or like something.
Keeping her close, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not just putting her off in the servants' tents to go wander around. Like, be like, oh, I want this servant in my bedroom. I want her to sleep with us. Like,
Totally.
Yeah, that always seemed like a fallacy, but at the same time, Egwene is young and sometimes really overconfident, and she's also really trusting, but she also does have to be trusting somewhat. I was glad that she trusted Swan and, how did MK pronounce it? Leonai. But how much it mentions that she trusts Shiriam. Like, now no, and then you go back and you're like, she puts so much trust in this very scary person.
her support's very unstable. And I love what Jordan does with her chairs, because the seat, the Amerlin seat, which is literally the chair she's sitting on, when she starts traveling, it starts having a wobbly leg. Here in Saladar, her seat is a real chair that's very solid. Her base of power is fairly solid in Saladar. The second she starts traveling, her seat of power starts becoming unstable. And I love the little analogy he does where he has the physical chair represent the rule of her as Amerlin's seat, if that makes sense, and
I've
that
never
power.
caught that. That's really true, though.
Yeah, I didn't catch that either.
And every time she plops herself down and something folds and it almost sends her toppling, that's absolutely oh, Egwene just made a mistake, or her base of support is wobbly.
Well, and I think one of the things that I first wrote down was how when she starts the conversation with Swan and Liane, who comes in right after Swan, that she, while talking to them and listening, weaves a silence barrier around them so they can't be eavesdropped, and doesn't tie it off. So she's holding this weave the whole time while she's having a conversation, though she is really young. It was such a good little reminder of her skills.
Right. Yeah, she can do this stuff subconsciously almost, that a full sister would be like, wow, this is such an accomplishment, and she's just doing it casually.
And she has provided a steady stream of amazing accomplishments from Moghedien, right? She's got the traveling, which is her own, but then she says, I've provided a whole bunch of other things, and we get from Moghedien's POV that she's much more effective at pulling weaves out of Moghedien. We don't get a lot of examples.
No.
That's the one thing, but supposedly there's a bunch of very interesting weaves coming out of Moghedien from Egwene. And so, man, it's so crazy to me that all of these Aes Sedai are treating her like a child still, even though she's teaching them all these amazing Age of Legends things.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is you get people who are older, who have been in power for a long time, who get comfortable, who feel like, well, this is the way of things, and you just gotta learn it that way, and I'll teach you. But it takes time, and they feel like everybody's got to go their same path to get there. And so the Aes Sedai are treating her like that because she hasn't done the work, you know?
Even though she's really talented and powerful, which is usually what they prioritize.
But and not just that, they've in their rigidness, they've closed themselves off. And one of the things that I loved most about Egwene becoming Amyrlin and these scenes where she's, in it, and it's all that building of all the politics stuff, is that she was like, this rule's stupid, this rule's stupid, this rule's stupid, and then just got rid of them and started doing things. And all the Aes Sedai were like, no, no, no. And then they start benefiting, and they're like, well, almost like it was their idea anyway.
Classic. That's a stupid idea. Oh, it's good. I'm taking it.
The recruiting of older novices, right?
You look at the ages that they're talking about. I mean, Egwene starts out with like 15. And at this point, I think by the end of the series, she's like 20, 22, something like that. Like, she's young.
18 to 20, yeah.
Yeah, she's still really young. But they're talking about the cutoff being at like 20. So you have this like tiny amount of time to get people. And she was saying, yeah, Nicola was like about Nynaeve's age, about 27, like 25 to 27. Really? Yeah, that's too old.
It's too old to be brainwashed.
I don't know. Anyone can be brainwashed.
Well, okay, fair enough. It's much harder. It's much harder to brainwash adults than it is to brainwash children. Because children will believe anything you tell them, and you can establish that. And teenagers as well. It's just a lot easier to force people to act a certain way if you can get to them. The younger you get to them, the better. And there's some real indoctrination that happens in the White Tower. I mean,
it's very churchy.
Yeah, it's very churchy.
Yeah.
Everything from the election of the new Amyrlin being very much like the bringing up of the new Pope to, the abuses that are happening behind closed doors. It's very churchy.
Right.
Yeah, it's like getting up to do your chores at a very specific hour of the day according to a bell that goes off every few hours, and being completely cloistered and having a lot of like very Spartan aesthetics and very unquestionable authority figures.
Right.
It does really feel like the novice and accepted are in sort of a nunnery.
Yeah, very much. They're isolated from the world, not allowed to get up to anything with men. Very, very, nuns.
They wear a ring that forces them, they're married to the power, the creator. Yeah.
Right. It took me a little while after I read the series, like a couple years, the first few books, to realize like what Pillow Friends was. And I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. You got a lot of hormones going on, especially if all the novices are in their late teens.
All right.
One of the things I had written was like page 207 about how Egwene misses that Siuan recognized that Edwina is far stronger than she thinks. And I think it was frustrating how much she leans on Siuan, but at the same time can treat her like a child sometimes. And how much Siuan can act like a child. Because of how old she is and because of how much experience she has, it was really odd to me, like a writing choice, that he decided to write her that way, in which she does act so childish. But I guess it's also the product of being in power for so long.
And from such a young age, right? I think that she's kind of, Egwene parallels her in that like they're both way too young for the office they get put into, and that maybe leave some gaps in their education, right? Like Swan reflects books later on how like she never got to go out and see the world she was saving, and Moraine did.
Right.
So Egwene's kind of like you were saying, she's like a 30-year-old virgin. Like she doesn't know how like basic human stuff happens because she's like learning this like PhD level Aes Sedai politics and like skipped so many steps in between. Swan's kind of in that position, if less dramatically.
It kind of reminds me of when Rand's like, oh yeah, I've been all around the world, but I've only really seen the inside of some palaces and the back of a horse.
Right.
He's very inexperienced at the end of the series, even though he's ruled the world.
And I think one of the things I also remembered and picked up on again was that, Siuan is the way that she looks after being half healed from stilling was about 25. Like she kind of mentioned, she's about in her mid-20s, but everyone talks about her looks like she's like 15, how she has absolutely no lines in her face and she's very like young and pouty, and it's hard to get that mental image away from this really young face. It's 25 is because she says she's like about a good childbearing age. Depends on what century you're in.
Yeah, but in this world, probably 25 is a reasonable.
Yeah, if we're assuming it's like now, it's like 25 is technically like your prime.
If you're a millennial,
means.
I think, isn't it 50, right?
Yeah, we look that
that's
way now.
It feels that way.
And one of the things I was thinking about reading the Saladar stuff again was that how the Aes Sedai are so about how, we're so powerful and we're so this unified front that we want to present to the rest of the world. And yet, even in front of the carriagemen and the warders and all the people who help run everything, they're so disrespectful to Egwene. And that undermines their own authority and their own power thing. Like the idea that women can't coexist without being catty to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that men will fall in line with the hierarchy immediately. The warders have no problem obeying her,
and respecting her.
And respecting her, because men respect authority, whereas women, they need to be convinced and cajoled and manipulated, and he does justify it by saying, like, the White Tower in particular is all about plotting, right? They're very much going to undercut, and like it's not necessarily a male-female thing so much it is the White Tower and Aes Sedai. But
probably a lot of his gripes with politicians he was able to express.
Yeah, it's like Congress.
Yeah, exactly.
It's basically Congress.
Yeah.
And because they're old and there's people are still voting them in and they're still there and they're stuck to their old rules and they think it's still 1970 or whatever, but it's not.
1770, whatever.
Whatever.
I always imagine the White Tower is that amplified by like 10, because these old men have, imagine if they lived to be 300. Imagine if McConnell's around for another 220 years. Like, and still was in Congress for that entire time, like
Ramonda.
Yeah.
But I mean, literally a big fancy white building split between the red and the blue, who are trying to control the world and be the police of certain magical items found around the world. No idea where he was drawing that from in the real world.
Nah. They're working against their own interests so often. Like all of the Aes Sedai are doing that, and yet that's why Egwene was such a good choice for Amberlin, because she comes in and she's a fresh face and she's like, hey, these ideas are stupid. Let's fix it.
Yeah, she cares more about results than protecting the institution, which is like, whoa.
But it ends up protecting the institution by having more people, eventually having the Aes Sedai partner with Ashaman, and I don't know, have some babies, because that would make more powered people and who can touch the source.
I question how real the geneticness of channeling actually is. I mean, it does come in families, but like supposedly they've been culling it, but they haven't been culling it. They've just not been looking for it. It's out there.
Yeah, I don't think they've been culling it, but I do think it's genetic. It's got to be genetic. He puts way too much energy on the old blood sings. People can learn Latin from their family history just coming through in a moment of terror. Channeling is genetic. Like, it just has to be.
Yeah.
But the whole culling hypothesis is just like the fact that you're only looking for sparkers and you have an age cutoff means that you're catching like 1% of the population that has that gene.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I still think that by doing the culling that they are weeding out people. Definitely that they're missing a lot of them, but I think that they are. I mean, for instance, if you made sure that redheads couldn't have kids anymore together, it would pop up, of course, because it's genetic, and it would pop up from the family line, but it would be a lot more rare than just allowing people to mate as they see fit.
Wait, are redheads allowed to have kids together? I thought that was illegal.
Yeah, my parents were like the last,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Good.
They cut their nose off to spite their own face often. The thing about Egwene, though, like not understanding Rand, is so frustrating. I feel like half the books could have just like not even been written if people had just communicated with each other.
Like 3/5 of the books.
Uh-huh. But I also would argue that it's not very realistic to put a bunch of teenagers in charge of the world and expect them to communicate with each other.
Oh my god, they're so awful at it. Yeah.
It's true.
Even when communication doesn't take months.
Right.
And there was a situation here where Egwene is saying, like, I would love to go to Rand, but I literally, like, am forbidden from going to my buddy and talking to him. Like, literally, it's the one law that I have to obey. I am not allowed to put myself in danger. And, of course, everyone here assumes the Dragon Reborn is danger, even though he's my childhood friend. And to be frankly, he is a little insane, so they're not entirely wrong.
He is dangerous. But I think he would have been less dangerous if people had reached out to him, and it was a good allegory for mental health. Rand, how depression and how dealing with trauma is isolating, and by being in the moods that you go through, you end up isolating yourself more, and people feel like you need space, or they don't want to burden you or bother you, and that isolates you, and it's a self cycle. And by Egwene wanting to reach out to him, or everyone around him is saying, well, he's just a drowning man, he's going to pull you under, and so you can't try and save him, and that is what makes him drown.
Right, because no one's willing to reach out a hand, and so
right.
Yeah, he's just struggling.
Yeah, it's like the one Aes Sedai who he could actually hear things from and trust, and
would have changed his mind on Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
And okay, this is why I like Codswain, I think, way more than most people. Because, good. Because she's so much, when he's rejecting everybody and being a dick to everyone around him, she's like, go ahead and be a dick to me, boy. I'm just going to slap you upside the head and say, have manners, right? You're not going to drive me away, no matter how awful you are. And yes, it's not the best, some people are like, oh, it's abusive and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, no, she's just standing up to someone who's become power hungry and willing and able to terrify anyone from telling him the truth. And someone is finally stepping up and saying, no, you're not always right.
Yeah, which he needed to hear 6 months ago by the time she shows up. So she has to lay it on.
Well, there's so much of the behaviors in the series that is problematic, even for lovable characters, and that is toxic. And that's just the time that it was written and what was popular.
And I look at it like cartoon violence, and I hate to do that because it is, I think of these as real characters, but the idea of the slaps and the punches and the things, it's like he's trying to convey displeasure without having them say they're displeased, and he uses physical contact in a lot of cases to write that into the series.
Right.
But I see that more as a message between the characters and less of actual physical violence from one to the other. And I know it is happening.
Right.
But we also in a world where they go to battle, they get cut up pretty bad, and the Aes Sedai heal them up, and there's that stab wounds are less of an issue when you have an Aes Sedai hanging around. They just are.
Well, she's also his stern grandmother, and she is trying to give him that tough love, but also the reminder that he is not invincible and infallible. And they definitely do fight like cats and dogs, and it is frustrating at times. But again, I think it's the time period and what was also popular in culture for those types of personality traits. I think Jordan still uses those stereotypical traits from that time and still is able to expand on them and still make them feel like real people. That's, I think, why it's still a relatable series in so many ways. Egwene and not being able to go to Rand was, again, them. It seemed like so many times she inside, her gut knew the right decision and her gut knew what to do. But the Aes Sedai in there trying to stop themselves from being, I don't know, like Congress, progressive, bite their nose off to spite their face. And it gets them in the end. He distrusts them more and he doesn't work with them. And there are so many things that they could have done together if she had been able to meet with him. But because she couldn't for so long, it doesn't help. And she knew in that moment, now was the time. And before was the time, before he got kidnapped was the time.
Yeah.
Or if her team had been able to come and rescue him, that would have shown the divide, that it wasn't just all Aes Sedai were out to get him.
And then imagine an actual united White and Black Tower, where you have these full circles working together.
Yeah, well, that's what I imagine in the end of the series.
Right.
Yeah. That's where it is at the end. And there's going to still be problems, but they're working together.
Yeah, but they one of the things I don't like about this series is they bring the White and Black Tower together in involuntary ways. It's the Black Tower bonding Elida's Aes Sedai involuntarily.
Yeah.
It's the there's very few, a lot of those unions happen unwillingly, and then only sort of do they realize how powerful it is that they're like, oh, okay, this is fine, we're gonna work together.
There's a lot of consent issues in this series.
There is. That's what I would have loved to see is hey, let's see Egwene rescue Rand and have them say, okay, I've got this Black Tower that are starting to become these weapons, and I've got these Aes Sedai who have sworn to me. Let's put them together. And instead of making one the prisoners or anything like that, like, let's actually have a shared school to create new things. The idea is there. He's creating the actual school, right? He's creating the Black Tower. Create a school for the Black and the White Tower to work together. My second pitch for the Grey Tower in I don't know how many episodes.
The series kind of, it ends too soon.
Yeah,
there was at least several chapters left, if not another book.
Another 14-book series, you know.
And from what I know, there was supposed to be another book, but they just didn't have enough to complete it. And Harriet felt like with what they had from Jordan to give to Sanderson was enough to get to where it got. But there was supposed to be more. And that's really unfortunate. And that's the one thing that I feel like, you know, maybe we'll get with the show, but you know, I don't know. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. Like it's just it's a multiverse. It's a different Wheel of Time.
It will be a Wheel of Time, not the Wheel of Time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a turning of the wheel, which is, it's a perfect series for this kind of thing.
You know, in 20 years, when they decide that they want to bring it back, we can have another turning of the wheel.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
have a whole other set of actors.
Yeah, for sure.
But you know, when she's talking about something happened with Alana and how she knew something had happened and something had changed, but you know, the thing that ends up, the repercussions that she gets for essentially raping Rand, she is not enough. You know,
No.
It was not enough at all. And the idea that they're so staunch in so many things, and yet she wasn't kicked out of the tower or, I don't know, stilled for forcefully bonding somebody. That was always really surprising to me. It wasn't because they were like, oh, this is something we can use. But it's like, no wonder he doesn't trust you all, you know?
Yeah, no, the sentence in the letter that she gets,
Yeah.
Alana had formed an attachment to the wool merchant, which may prove useful, though it is troubling too. And that's all we ever get is like, useful and troubling, but useful.
No, it's extremely troubling. And as his friend, I think if Egwene, because it seemed like she didn't quite figure out what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And if she really knew, because she knew Rand, if she really knew what that meant at that time, I think she would have burned the place down, you know, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Because it's her friend.
Agreed. I never thought about that. But yeah, if she had ever actually learned what Alana had done, she would have been like, okay, my first executive order is that bitch.
Yeah.
Do you think she could have ordered her to release the bond?
Yes. And I think she would have. She would have been like, no Adam on my childhood friend who's also the world's savior. Please and thank you. And then Rand might have been like, oh, now I feel really tired. Hey, Elaine, about that bond.
Yeah. Well, and even the politics of it would have been interesting because that would have been a political minefield. The sitters would have suggested that she stay so that way they can keep tabs on Rand and how he's feeling. And it would have gone against everything Egwene believes in. But I think she would have ordered it against them to say, like, this is wrong. You can't just bond people.
That's probably why they don't ever tell Egwene. It's because they're like, the reason we picked her is because she really likes Rand. Maybe let's not complicate that.
Unless you're like Elaine and you're trying to save somebody's life or, you know, whatever. You can't bond people.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Egwene does that to Gawain.
Yeah.
But again, it's a life or death snap decision. So, and, you know, in that case, he would have said yes if she'd had time to ask. So
there was some implied consent, I think.
So I wanted to get a little bit into this interaction between Suan and Egwene. She just, you know, they're like, oh, Egwene asks them to look for any evidence. And they're like, well, what's the point? And she's like, what do you mean, what's the point? I asked you to do it. Do it.
I love that smackdown.
Yeah, great little smackdown. And it does make sense. They do need to look. And she's like, I want to see anything about this person, this man, because they assume it's a man, because it's a man who could channel.
Right.
Which is why that when we do come back and they report, oh, we didn't see anyone, just Halima.
Just Halima.
Just the person who did it.
It's fine.
I love that little foreshadowing. And at this point, it has been dropped that we know who Halima is, right?
Yes.
We know Halima is Arengar.
But it was also...
We're not sure that Arengar is Balthamel. That hasn't been explicitly made clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like in the prologue, you're like, wait, who are these two assholes?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's
Right.
not
You don't know
obvious.
which one's which until, like, much Like some small internal thought, like right before one of them dies, is like the only clue you get. So
I think it also, the series is so gender role-y, and how this is feminism, this is masculinity, this is the way everybody is. And the introduction of Halima was kind of like, I wondered, I know it's a quote unquote like a man's soul trapped in a woman's body, but I wondered how many people in the world actually, could touch Satan or Sadar, not how they looked outwardly, who they are internally. And it added a good question of people who are transgendered.
it was like he tried, but then like completely whiffed the whole thing, and now it's just like, no, can we not with this? But like it is like he wanted to try.
Yeah, like in my mind, that just, even when I was a kid, like reading it, I was like, oh, okay, so what you identify internally is the source that you can touch. Because I think it answered that question. Because does a soul have a gender?
Right, yeah. Which, the way Jordan writes it, it does.
Well, he identifies himself as a man. Like his soul identifies as a man, but he is in he is in a female presenting body with those attributes. But he doesn't reach for Sadar, despite the fact that the body that he's in, technically by his magic rules, would have Sadar instead of Satan. But who he identifies as in his soul is male, so he reaches Satan. And that to me was like, oh, awesome. Right. I want to meet more people like this, Right. And it was it was tragic in a way that it was like the villain, the dark.
Right. I was gonna say the troubling thing is that then, of course, that's the evil person.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Right.
So.
And that's another stereotype of the time that is hopefully dead now.
Yeah. The whole man in a dress preying on innocent young women thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to see examples of others who were not a villain.
No, and also the fact that this had to be the Dark One's intervention to cause this to happen, also kind of problematic. So, there's a lot going on there. We really do say that this is a universe where male and female dichotomy is emphasized. The Wheel of Time very much says there are two genders.
Right.
And the Dark One. That's apparently a gender. You just have to accept that as part of the world building. But it is nice that even with all of his datedness and all of that, like, he still built a world that we can massage into a more comfortable state and be like, he did affirm identity over packaging and, all of that. So it's like, it's not hard. You don't have to break canon to make it more open and accessible. You just have to bend it slightly in the fault lines he already built into it.
Right. Well, the whole series is about power and balance. The whole journey for Rand is about finding equilibrium in the end and finding balance. And when you do find that true balance, I think there is a use of the power, not one or the other. And because the Aes Sedai are so imbalanced and the Ashman are so imbalanced and everybody's trying to do this tug, push and pull, it isn't with the idea of finding balance. It's about, how do I gain as much power with what I have? Yeah. It's very off topic.
And now you're making me think of that like ivory tower that one of the Forsaken, I think it was Masana, like builds out of the little animals at one point, and she's like very proud of how she does it just with her knowledge of balance and never uses the power for it. That was what you made me think of.
Marie, how do you say the Marina?
Marana, yeah.
One she's talking about in the letter. She starts thinking about after that she hadn't been heard from. I can't remember if she was dead.
No, that's because of the kidnapping. There's no word because everyone's like, we are not letting that news out.
Well, this is happening the same day as Dumai's Wells, as far as I can tell. So the 2 weeks leading up to this, all the communication out of Kyrie and everyone's been mum because Rand's been missing. For a while he was just on a trip, but now everyone's realizing for the last 10 days or so that he's been kidnapped, and they're trying to keep that a secret.
Yeah.
I noticed Egwene's getting a little headachy because she has been being visited by Halima on a regular basis.
Yeah.
We don't realize that until next chapter, but this is definitely a Halima-caused headache.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you notice, though, that she doesn't mention the headache after she leaves the tent?
Oh, you're right. Yeah. She leaves to walk it off, and yeah.
When she goes to get fresh air, which as someone who gets frequent migraines, it does help.
Sure.
But she is prominently thinking about the headache in the beginning of the chapter, and as the chapter goes on, and she's in her power space, which is a walk to think and focus. She's centering herself to be able to make these decisions. She doesn't mention the headache anymore. And one of the things I noticed as somebody who has headaches, it's really easy to notice them, but the moment that they start to really go away, you almost forget that the pain ever existed.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting back to normal is...
It's easy to be like, oh, I didn't realize it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me wonder if there's some sort of inverted tied-off weave on her tent that's giving her the headaches.
Maybe. Or the chair.
Ooh, bringing it back to the chair. I like that. The Amerlin seat itself is what's causing the headaches, and it's tied off to that. And that way it's...
a lot of stress.
No, that too, but like that way it's linked to the person who's sitting in it, and she can target just that one person rather than the whole tent. I like that a lot.
And maybe it makes it also easier to not have it be detected by another channeler, because you can, like, I don't know, somehow embed it in an object rather than have it hanging in the air or something. Some fancy Age of Legends thing that, like, the Aes Sedai forgot 2,000 years ago, you know?
Yeah, which is very like, I wrote this thing, explain away.
Also, it's the male power, and there's no one in that entire tent who could sense it. She
of course.
didn't even have to invert it, just toss it right there, and it's just as long as it's attached. The only person who could have seen it was Logain, and she got rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was dumb.
Well, he was going to get executed by Halima if Egwene didn't send him out, so...
Right. But he would have been such a good person to have on her side, too.
Seriously.
Like, it wasn't dumb saving his life, but it was dumb. I think he would have been a great advocate if they all just hadn't been so pig-headed.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to become opposite Amerlin to what, you know, I mean, they could have been parallel leaders for a brief moment.
Partners and work together. Yeah, I can only imagine what the White Tower would have actually come to if Egwene had stayed Amerlin for several hundred years. I mean, they would have flourished. I want to read that book. I'll never get it, but I want to read it.
So bad.
It always takes me back to that statement with Tuon. I plan to live for centuries. And then I just like, oh, no, don't do that to me, Egwene.
I had to like put it down for a second and be like,
Yeah.
When I read that scene, I like ugly cried. I shut the book and didn't pick it up for a week. Like I couldn't.
Yeah, that was rough.
Super important. But Chesa shows up. And again, like, talking about embedding things, I swear to God, Chesa is a red herring for Arendar.
I still don't
even
trust
though we
her.
already know.
I still don't trust her. The more we read, the less I trust her.
Yeah.
Even though we know who Arendar is, we know Halima's the bad guy here. Like we know Chesa isn't Halima, but at the same time, like the way she's like tidying up, and the way she's always in the tent, the way we were talking about having that weave on the chair, Chesa could have been the perfect opportunity to do it. Like I really do think we're supposed to look at Chesa with a suspicious
minds.
Eyes. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
MISSISSIPPI. Yeah.
You know, and I think it was actually kind of important that Egwene does dress down Suan after she really speaks out of turn.
Sure.
And that Suan notices, like, I taught you well. You were scary there for a minute. Like, that was kind of like in a good like mother-daughter relationship, whether it's just your biological mom or not, you pick up those things, and there is one day where you give a look or you do a thing that your mother does, or mother figure, and that moment of recognition of, I did a good job. Like, I passed the torch. Okay, but they still need me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, because our parents are always a little hypocritical, right? They know the right thing to do, even if they can't always do it themselves. And so they teach us the right thing to do, even if they themselves aren't perfect. And so you can always catch them. And when you catch your parent doing something that they know they shouldn't do, and you go, yeah.
And it's a lot like a mother-daughter relationship in that she looks up to her in the beginning and isn't afraid of her, and, you know, is afraid of getting reprimanded. But as she gets into her own power and grows up, she sees Suan's fallibility, which is something we all go through. We start to see the problems, the humanity in our parents, you know, and where they make mistakes, and as they get older, how childlike they can be.
For sure.
Yeah, because something I've learned is people don't really grow up; they just get older. And that's
Some
true
people
of our-
don't. It's an active decision every day
Exactly.
to learn and grow.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of self-analyzation. And I think that's the thing that's so ingrained in the Aes Sedai, that they don't look at themselves and go, could I improve?
Why would you need to improve? You're already perfect.
Right.
If you're Aes Sedai, you're the best
Yeah.
there ever was and the best there ever could be. So why worry about self-improvement?
Right. But it's that whole imposter syndrome thing too, because it's like the opposite of it, because they're like, I'm perfect, but they're not.
90% of Aes Sedai think they're above average.
Yeah. We're not special. We're just special.
Well, it's like thinking you're the one that makes the most money in the office and finding out what everyone gets paid and being like, oh.
I got swindled.
Yeah. I am not a good negotiator.
I didn't negotiate at all. What do you think about the statement that okay, so this is actually something I really want to get Ariel's perspective on. The gateway opens, and it lights up, but it doesn't cast a shadow.
Yeah.
What? Like, how can you have light that doesn't cast a shadow? And, like, how would you visualize that?
Magic.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thanks.
My artist brain went, it has a shadow, and like I rolled my eyes, and it was just like, that's not how light works.
It's just a really faint shadow. Like, we'll just go with that.
Like, I mean, it likely does, but there were so many things that he described to make it feel eerie and magical that it's so ingrained into physics of what humans are used to that it's very hard to picture things like that. You know, you can almost picture it like a window, because they don't, from my understanding, they don't glow when it's almost like a window in the fabric of reality, just opening up in like a perfect, whatever shape they make it, square, rectangle, of another place that they step out of, and that they actually do not glow. When I was making the t-shirt of Nynaeve and Lan going through the gateway, and there's the front where it's her coming out and him guarding, and the back is, you can see him. We had a lot of trouble with that because I wanted to do like this cool, like, like glow. And Harriet and Maria were like, they don't glow. And I was like, but my mind says that looks cool.
Right.
You know? And it creates a really cool effect. And so what we ended up doing is this kind of weave of blue like lines, almost spidery lines around it, that made it look like this crackle of air, which probably still wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of imagined the edges of being very fuzzy, like it was a fuzzy window, that it wasn't quite clear. But yeah, you are supposed to just be able to see like the room they're coming out of, almost like a glass door, a glass door.
I love that you pull out. When I talked about Harriet, I talked to Harriet about this. I just love it when people do that. We had Recapa Sedai on last week, and
A couple weeks ago now, but yeah.
A couple weeks ago now, yeah.
Time is relative.
I don't know. I was just editing that episode. You know,
Fair
it was
enough,
one of
fair
those things.
enough.
And Brian is convinced that the way he's describing it is it's a horizontal thing that spins this way to create a circular doorway, and just blew his mind that it was rectangular. And anyway, it's just sort of the different
The shape, the light, the things
shape-
are very
the shape, like-
complicated.
Yeah, these things, it's like they're very hard to picture, and everyone has their own version of how the gateways look in their head. Like,
Right.
Brian sees a perfect circle. I remember Patrick used to like to see like a vertical oval.
Well, it depends on who makes them, because I think Andrel does end up making like circles. But from what I
Does he?
remember, they were like, what I pictured were like little windows. But I thought at one point that he was able to make different shapes. But I think, you know, the ways of traveling in the series are all visually different. Like skimming looks different
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
than gateways. And the dreamwalking looks different than gateways.
Yeah.
And they're doing something really smart here with the skimming and the traveling, which is like how I think skimming and traveling are supposed to work, right? That you skim away from a location that you walk to, that's like, and then you can go to like a standard hub, and then you travel from that hub to wherever you want to go.
Well, in essence, gateways are essentially a wormhole, because you're opening a window in reality on one end of a place, and you're opening it on another end of a place, and you're creating the Einstein's bridge.
Yeah.
You're going from one to the other out. And so,
but it's a wormhole of 0 length.
yeah, like it's the Einstein's bridge theory. Like you're ripping a hole in reality to go under the other side. And so that's why it makes sense that it's dangerous to just open one wherever.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then you tear a hole in a person.
Yeah.
That was-
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of reminds me of like in Harry Potter, the splicing.
Mhm.
Like
yeah.
when they go to, oh, what is it called?
Apparate?
And
then they splinch.
Yeah,
That's
splinching.
one of the
yeah.
best words ever.
That's also something that could go wrong when dealing with gateways, like how dangerous they are, and the Aes Sedai are just like, whatever. As soon as they learn it, like, thanks, bye. Like, they're so ungrateful. So ungrateful.
That's true, though. It's like, this is our birthright. Thanks. We don't need the manual. It's fine.
No, and it's like the Yellows who are like, oh, thanks, Nynaeve. Yeah, we've got your techniques. Now go away. Well, we know it better than you.
Right.
So they're heading out to Saladar. They're getting pigeons. So basically that's their communication hub as well. So that's one of the reasons why they're maintaining Saladar as a location, is because it is where the pigeons know to fly back to.
Yeah.
And so all their spies are reporting back to Saladar. And
Right.
then they can use gateways to keep up with that information.
I always really wanted to see if they had just given Nynaeve like almost like a laboratory space and just been like, be a scientist, which is what she is.
Right.
Like, explore and test things and break stuff and fix things. Like, that would have been like she would have just like made stuff that nobody had ever made. Like, anyway.
Yeah, cure for cancer and male pattern baldness all at the same time.
Please. Yeah. Instead, they made her spend half her day punishing her and forcing her to like
Scrub pots.
It is the way a lot of people parent.
Mm.
A lot of people parent in which they treat their children like they're not people and that they are like possessions to be told what to do, instead of getting them to learn to critically think and work on things. And it's Aes Sedai stifling the critical thinking in all the novices.
Yeah, I always thought that was so weird how they're meant to be unthinking children objects until they get the shawl, and then they're supposed to start thinking for themselves. And it's like, I feel like you kind of set them back really far. 10, 15 years of never question anything, and now you're expected to be a higher authority than kings? Like, how does that make sense?
But there's a certain amount of, you're also giving them explosives and a gun. And you don't want them experimenting with those when nobody's around. And so you have to do exactly what you're told and nothing else, or else there's a good chance that you're going to kill yourself and possibly somebody else around you.
Well, again, it's like parenting. We have 2 preteens, and there's a certain leeway of critical thinking that you want to cultivate, and there's a certain amount of because I said so that you have to do because it's safe. Now, we talk to our kids. We say, why you're not supposed to be doing this, why that language isn't for you yet, and why these things, you're not ready for these things yet, because you're not there yet, and you need the tools to properly use those things. And instead of communicating that with the Aes Sedai, just tell them because I said so.
And punishment them corporally.
Right. And that creates an environment in which which a lot of millennials were raised with, you're told, don't think for yourself, but also think for yourself. And you get into this adulthood where you don't know how to make decisions without talking to somebody or getting approval.
I've had that problem at work, actually, where I literally, like, every time I do something, I have to take it to my instinct is take it to somebody to show them, to make sure that it's okay before I move on to the next thing. Yeah. And a lot of times people are like, why are you doing this? Go do the work. Leave me alone, and like, until you said that, I didn't realize like how connected those 2 behaviors are. Yeah,
like I don't know what to do with myself now I'm not in college, because there's no one handing me a syllabus and a schedule, and it's like, it's been 2 years, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like,
exactly.
I'm
working on it, Arania. Remember, recordings are twice a week. You have to be...
You're saving me. Thank you for having authority for me to like follow. It's awful.
And that's the thing, we're so taught to be as Aes Sedai are, to have to follow the syllabus, follow the schedule, do what your parents are saying, and
go to college.
Now figure it out. You have so much practice at this.
Right. Wait, what are taxes?
Something you don't learn in school because that's not important,
Yeah, it's amazing how much school has gone from preparing people to be adults to preparing them to be college students.
Oh, God, don't say it like that.
At least they don't tell them that just take out a loan, you can afford to pay it off anymore. That's what they told us. I mean,
But they
don't
just
do
say
that
give up
anymore.
25 years of your life and we may give you the authority to choose what you wear today.
Yeah.
Granted, you may get another 250 years of life tacked on at the end, but like...
Right. And I think that's why Egwene would have made an amazing long-term Amerlin, is that she wanted to break that system. She was creating these situations where people like Elaine and some of the novices were learning how to make stuff and just experimenting, giving room for creativity.
That's why Cotswain's such a disappointing new Amerlin. Like, because she represents she's literally the oldest of the old, the traditionalist of the, well, you know, she's not the most traditional of the Aes Sedai, but like, she is of old world.
She's the
Yes and no. I think she gets a clue because I think by the end of the series, Cadsuane has realized how stuck in her ways she was, and that she's gonna always be Cadsuane, but she definitely, I felt like, gives a clue that, okay, she spent enough time with Rand. I see that there's some things that need to change. And I think while she thought Egwene was a foolish girl, she also picked up on, well, that's smart, and that's smart, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I've always said the best Aes Sedai are those who are trained outside the tower, as we know Codswain was.
Right.
So,
and who her sitters, like who she surrounds herself with in her power base, is also going to really matter. It's like the president. It doesn't matter who's just in charge. It matters who's in their cabinet and who is around them.
Well, and one of the reasons why it matters who's in charge is because it matters who they pick to be around them.
Right.
That's like the main thing they do, right? Is to pick the people around them. That's like the number, you know.
And in that respect, Cadsuane's the best leader because she picks people on their merit and their abilities rather than how big their dick is. Like every other
A good
Aes Sedai.
leader delegates properly.
Like one of her most trusted people is one of the weakest Aes Sedai.
Yeah. I just hope that she is not going to rest on tradition.
Well, I don't think she's going to last more than a year. I think she's going to die like really soon. And then, you know, she's going to get the tower squared away, die, and then things will move on.
I don't know. She seemed like she could live just on spite alone for like a couple 100 years.
Well, and I firmly believe that Codswain will join the kin and continue to live for at least another 300 years.
Give up the oaths and retire into
Give
the
up
kin.
the oaths. Mm-hmm.
Unless she's already free of the oaths. No, she's not.
But that would explain why she lives so long.
Yeah, that would explain why she lives long. The mention that Siuan and Elaine can lie in this chapter because they don't have the oaths. It's just like a constant reminder again on how the Aes Sedai trap themselves in these boxes. And while the oaths were good, they're killing them sooner and they're preventing them from reaching their full potentials.
There's an interesting discussion between Siuan and Egwene, not necessarily in this chapter, where Siuan's basically saying, you can't get rid of the oaths. They are what make us Aes Sedai. That's what makes us more than, you know, there's all these other groups of channelers that exist out there, but what make them just random channelers and what make us Aes Sedai are these three oaths.
And that makes sense.
On some level. On another level, that wasn't the case in the Age of Legends. It certainly wasn't the case in the before the White Tower. Like, there was a long time when the Aes Sedai who were traveling around during the breaking were
lowercase Ajas or solo actors.
Yeah, and they didn't have the oaths, and they were definitely Aes Sedai, like all the male, and until the last male Aes Sedai was killed, you know, that's like it's a different kind of Aes Sedai, you know, and like this group took the title, but is not the same group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that what makes them quote unquote Aes Sedai is something that the Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends never had.
But I think it's by saying we have something that people know they will always get, or they will always have these parameters, and that makes us an unknown and a known commodity, and it's why we're allowed to boss around kings, because kings know that we can't lie to them. It's a stupid rule because anyone smart enough can dance around the subject and tell the truth, but not.
Yeah.
You know?
But there's also that, like, there's a couple of times where like people like, just tell me straight out, I need to know, and like they trap Shiriam in it a couple of times, even though technically she hasn't sworn the oaths, but like it there's definitely this idea that I would never negotiate with somebody if they had all this power and could lie to me, but at least if they physically can't lie, I might be able to trap them. I might have a slight advantage in negotiating or conversation or something. It's a wall I could put my back up against. And so I'm willing to negotiate with these powerful Aes Sedai, because I know, for one thing, they're not going to just randomly kill me.
Their warders might, but the Aes Sedai
Their warders might. Well, but I have no problem dying from a sword.
It's just the fireball.
It's just the fire. It's the power
Well,
that I'm scared of.
I think it's the idea that essentially prevented like a mass Salem witch hunt kind of thing, because with knowing that they can't just outright kill you makes them neutered and safe to be around. But if the Aes Sedai, after the breaking, after what that had happened, if you didn't know whether or not they could harm you or not, I think human, like regular people, would have gone out and done what they did to the men, to the women as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And just killed them or ostracized them, and there would be even less of them. So they had to have the 3Os to survive after the breaking, because Aes Sedai had broken the trust of everyone else.
Yeah, it's a really crappy way of keeping yourself safe, but it was extreme times, and it called for extreme measures.
So this letter came in before they left Saladar on their march to the White Tower, which was before Rand had been kidnapped, but after the meeting with the rebel embassy.
And Egwene had to work to get this letter.
Yeah.
She was not going to see this unless she pushed for it.
Right, which is, again, against their own interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wonder how much of that's Shiriam being just sort of private power hungry, and if there's any Black Aja influence there.
Oh, I think there was lots of Black Aja influence there.
Yeah.
Like, Shiriam was constantly throwing birds in her shoes.
Yeah, control the information, if nothing else, right?
I wonder how much information never got to Egwene.
Most of it, probably.
Thank goodness she had Suan and Leanne, who have their own spy networks, because and the dream and the conversations with the wise ones. In a lot of ways, she had more access to information than almost anybody else, simply because the real-time dream updates plus 2 spy networks.
Although Suan says that she, in this chapter, that she passes everything her eyes and ears give her to Shireen.
Yeah, because everyone, let's just trust the keeper.
I know. It's like, oh my gosh, they put so much trust in this person. Like,
yeah, and she's passing it all
and
right
I was completely bamboozled. I was so surprised when it turned out she was Black Aja. Like,
me
I
too.
was just like, no, did not see that coming.
No, but looking back, you see it.
Oh, totally.
But...
the chair with the snakes, there's a lot. But it's just, of course you trust your keeper. Lyanna's completely trustworthy, and this is Lyanna's replacement.
Also, she's blue, and we are led to trust the blue. We are led to mistrust the red and trust the blue.
Well, not even that. I mean, Shireen tries to present herself as this mother figure to so many of the characters because she was mistress of novices. Yeah. You know, and so they all see her as like firm but loving mom, when really it's just Farron all along.
For a Harry Potter reference, this is like McGonagall turning out to be evil,
right?
You know,
totally.
being like a secret Death Eater, you know, and you're like, what? How?
That would have been a cool twist.
That would have been a cool twist.
Wasn't foreshadowed at all. It would have been cool.
Dude, cats are evil.
Who says cats are evil?
A dog person.
Yeah.
I mean, she talks right after the letter about how, like, all the stuff with Rand, and she talked to him, and she does a lot of assumptions about Rand too. You know,
Rand courteous,
right? And that was crappy of her, but at the same time, again, they haven't seen each other a while. She's young.
Well, and she's kind of right. Like, Rand was kind of a dick in those meetings, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he wasn't not courteous though. I mean, like, wasn't that the one where he had like
The one she watched was the one that Egwene witnessed from behind the curtain of air. That was the first meeting with Coiron. That was the one where it's like, oh, these chests of gold are just a bribe. Definitely not a prison thing. Definitely not. That's the meeting she saw. And that was with the Tower Aes Sedai. So he was very overbearing and arrogant in that meeting because he was messing with her and with the Tower Aes Sedai at the same time.
Right. Well, it's that stereotyping. Like, she's playing into the stereotyping that he's a dumb boy and he's doesn't understand what he's doing, and it's sexist.
And of course the connection he would form with Alana is a sexual
Right.
one.
Yeah.
Right. That's where her mind goes. Is on the formed a connection. She must be sleeping with him.
Because Rand, my very conservative best friend from childhood who gets flustered at the sight of an ankle, totally is sleeping with a random Aes Sedai. That checks out completely.
Can't remember. Wasn't she in Tyr when Berylane was there?
Yeah,
Like,
she
we
totally was.
witnessed some of that behavior and saw him brush her aside. So why she would assume that Rand, would be sleeping with her is, it almost is like she's got resentment and anger towards him that she's not dealing with and projecting on him and not thinking of him as the person she knew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in a very self-unaware way. She's like, I know him. He's just like when we were children, like a lascivious playboy. That's exactly who I grew up with. Like, what?
Well, it's like assuming someone is a certain way without actually asking them how they feel or what they think.
Oh, now that he's powerful, he must be just hip deep in women. It's they do it a lot. Rand used to do it to Egwene too when she was like in the ideal tense, and she's like off running 50-mile laps around the city, and he's going like, oh, she just must be all bundled up in those furs and super comfortable, and she's like sleeping, and she did the same thing to him. He's like, those maidens must keep him super comfortable, and he's like on a pallet with like one blanket, and yeah.
Well, the series definitely is kind of run on everybody stereotyping each other and not communicating.
Yeah.
And that's a little frustrating because miscommunication is not a great plot device.
Well, 15 books says otherwise.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, just because it's 15 books long doesn't mean that the miscommunication was a good writing tool. But again, it was the time period in which that was really popular, not just in books and television, but culturally. Men were taught not to communicate and share their feelings, and women were taught that it was okay, but like not to be over dramatic and all these conflicting things. And so you have those stereotypes because that's the way people acted. We're the first generation that's really talking this much about mental health as much as we do and learning to communicate with each other. They don't have that here. And so by looking at it and being frustrated with the lack of communication, it just shows that, our bias of our time period.
Yeah. Well, and everybody stereotypes everybody. The men are stereotyping the women, the Kyrians are stereotyping the Andor men, the Aes Sedai are stereotyping the Ashaman, and vice versa. Yeah, everyone's stereotyping Aiel is like, like they can't even tell them apart, right? Like it's, there's one of the things he writes so well is, yes, the lack of communication is frustrating, but like it's not
real.
just between men and women. It's
right.
Between every group and every other group are making assumptions about each other.
Right. And it's real. I mean, look at today, look at xenophobia, look at all of those things, and it's real.
And that's where you get unreliable narrator comes into play
right.
too here, where, because these people are making assumptions, he can have them assert things about other characters and then prove them wrong. And one of his favorite things to do is set his characters up.
And it's showing them growing through really, strong growth years. Those years for anybody is a time where you're really changing from child to adult. I mean, I think most of us don't even really reach that until like later, but no, you're trying.
I'll let you know when that happens, if it ever does.
Right.
I need an adult to hear adult.
30 hit hard. So, it's like, and you're old.
Hey, I'm coming up on 40, so
yeah, but individually you can look at that and be like, but that's not old, but I'm old, but you're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as like,
yeah,
you're cool, but I'm not.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely trying to complain to my husband about my 30th birthday he's like, yeah, I'm 35, so shut it.
Right.
Like I did this 5 years ago. Like,
yeah. Well, my 30th birthday was the day that our state locked down.
And that does hit hard.
Like, we were not allowed to go anywhere. So it was kind of like,
it's 30, the world is ended. You're 30 and the world is ended. And you're like,
right,
oh, quite literally.
Right. And so you're sad and you get on Facebook and like everyone's getting engaged because the world's ending and you gotta do it and having babies. And you're like, I'm just going to go paint some more alone. So we had just finished reading about the letter and talked about Rand and her treatment of him, and then we talked a bunch about this part, the 216 her wanting to go to him and can't, and why, and we've been kind of jumping around the chapter.
We have jumped around quite a bit in this
Very
one. Yeah,
non-linear
which is
chapter
fine.
covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's tough. Well, especially because this is so much thinking and in her head about situations.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily, it's not a series of events, it's more like a series of thoughts, and those thoughts don't necessarily happen in order, and and can sometimes she jumps back to thoughts she's had previously. So there's this conversation about the letter Alviarin sent Rand, which she's like, is she really the one who sent it? Because it seems ridiculous. There's no way. And it's like, yeah, she lied because she's dark friend. You know, like
I know.
Yeah, like that's
She's
the big
evil.
Yeah, that was Masana, not Alviarin.
I mean, I'm sure Alviarin penned the letter,
Yes,
but you know.
It was dictated to her from on high.
The fact that she's just walking around, and this is one of the naive things that really she's thinking about all this stuff, and it's hyper analytical, and she's almost like ADHD to me. She's very like hyper focused, but not aware of her surrounding as much. Like she's noticing things, but she's not picking up on the fact that she is being very cavalier with her safety right now.
Yeah.
She's walking around the camp at night in the dark with no one else with her in a camp she knows is not safe. She started the chapter with the news that Moghedien has escaped and someone let her out.
Who's to say Moghedien isn't hanging around in a bush somewhere?
Right. And then she keeps getting snuck up on by people to come talk to her because she's so lost in thought. And that was just like, oh my God, Egwene, like somebody could have just been like, stop. And then she just would have been like, well, new Merlin. You know?
Right? Like any random soldier with a knife could have killed her with the amount of attention she's paying.
Right. Anyone, she mentioned standing over the carriagemen while talking to Leanne, who are snoring because it's now very late and very dark. And who's to say that's not Leanne, somebody who looks like her, or it's, you know, one of the carriagemen gets up and kills them both. It was just this whole time thinking about how she was in trouble, or could have been, and how she also doesn't take into account how serious the blackmailing and the threat that Nicola does. Her friend's name, I think I didn't write down. Yeah, how she was like fingering her bow, and they were trying to be threatening physically to her while blackmailing her and gaslighting her that no, we're not blackmailing you, but we are.
Yeah.
Or are we?
Yeah, I mean, in Egwene's defense, I just don't think she thinks of herself as a target. She's like, who would want to target me? I'm just... everyone thinks I'm... Well, but a puppet, right? She's a puppet. You know, everyone thinks she's a puppet. She knows everyone thinks she's a puppet. Like, no one's going to go after her. She's not the power center yet.
Well, I think also she's a little overconfident in her abilities. And like the rest of the Aes Sedai, they're being so stuck-up children, and they're not thinking about themselves. You know, they're not thinking that they can do anything, but really they're just being children, and I'm the one that, you know, taught them all of these things, and I'm bringing all this information in, and I can defend myself.
Yeah, because you know everything, Egwene. There's literally nothing you don't know at this point.
Right. And later in the books, Elaine, you know, that happens to her where she's like, I have the power, and forgets that people have knives and there are predators who don't need magic to hurt you.
No, it's like later when, like, guns are a thing, and, like, all it takes is somebody with a gun to shoot someone from the bushes, you know? The warders are constantly saying this. All it takes is one man with a crossbow, and you're dead, you know? And, like, before you even can embrace the power, it's gonna happen. You know, it almost killed Rand, and he just happened to look up the roof at that one moment, you know? Taviran saved his life, right? It's... People are squishy, man.
Yeah. And I think it was almost surprising that she hadn't been approached yet by one of the warders in training, or a warder who was already with an Aes Sedai, like, can I walk with you, mother? You know, do you need protection? Do you need assistance? Or can I help you? And the warders bow to her, and when she looks at the gateways, and they're really respectful, despite their Aes Sedai, which I was like, yeah, like, leave those bitches. Like, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you'd think that, like, a spare green warder could have been assigned to the Amerlin. Like, don't tell her to take a warder, but, like, maybe find a green who has 5 and pull one of them onto Amerlin duty.
Right. It was surprising that she never had a guard.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that. There's never been any, like, not from Gareth Bryn, not from the Warders, not from, I guess what would have been the palace guard. Was there like a tower guard?
Yeah, there is a tower guard.
So that's, but they're not with.
No, they're in the tower.
They're in the tower. So
But Gareth Byrne was a tactical genius. You think he would
Yeah.
be like, look, despite tower, whatever, this woman's really important to our cause. We need to make sure that she is protected. And he does that with Suan, like treats her like, look, you're being an insolent child. I'm going to do this anyway. Even Ramonda, who thought that Egwene was important enough to stick around, that it would destabilize everything if Egwene was just offhandedly murdered. And they mention that her people have threatened her and they have to watch her tea and all that stuff. Like, why are they not watching her person?
I guess I can be a little more forgiving of them because they think she's in a stronghold surrounded by Aes Sedai that no one can get into. She knows Mogedian's running loose.
And so does Suan and Lian, and the fact that Lian leaves her in the dark alone.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I feel like she kind of checked out a little bit. Like, once she was returned from Stilling, that she, like you were saying, she never got to be like Swan and never got to be like a free 20-something.
Mm-hmm.
That's like getting married at 18 and then suddenly being free at 25. Like, you live your early 20s again.
Mm-hmm.
And Lian is doing that, but she was being really selfish in that moment. And she struck me originally as a really smart tactician herself, that she would just leave Egwene in the dark alone on the edge of camp.
It's a weird gap.
Yeah. I think it's just assumed safety. They're just so used to feeling safe.
But she knew Mohidan was out, and she knew somebody let her out.
Or it's just Jordan doing the walk and talk from I need to have a bunch of meeting with these people. I'll have her walk and have them just show up one at a time, and that's how I'll keep the plot moving. So there's just that kind of aspect of it. So they're not all like just visiting her in the tent. She can randomly encounter these people and have this confrontation with Nicola and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I think in a way he also wanted to emphasize and have the reader think about it, but maybe not Egwene, that she is vulnerable.
She's alone in the dark, wandering around without protection.
To remind us that, like, there is danger everywhere, and kind of like Game of Thrones, killing main characters, nobody's safe.
Right.
Yeah, because there's a couple of jump scares. Leanne showing up is a jump scare. Right? I like how Leanne calls the Aiel women irritating.
Such a euphemism.
Rand can hardly be as irritating as those Aiel women.
Right.
That's one of those interactions. We never really see that happen on screen, but man, their reactions to those interactions are some of my favorite things. Because then you get to imagine what actually happened. And Jordan never spells it out, but there's enough strong personality that I just imagine the confrontation and...
Right. And once again, it's another situation where they could learn so much if they just weren't so egotistical.
Oh my god, can you imagine how much they could have learned if they had actually respected the wise ones as teachers?
How strong they could actually be, right?
Yeah.
How much they could have dominated Teleron Riyadh.
Yeah, and taken back the tower without a siege, and like basically negated the Shanshan attack before it ever happened.
I mean, yeah, the Rebel Aes Sedai has such advantages in terms of power, Teleron Riyadh, traveling. Like, it's amazing that it's even a contest.
Right. Well, and it's a typical writing plot device. If you have someone really OP, you have to retcon them a little bit in their intelligence or in their skills of figuring things out, because otherwise there's no conflict.
Right.
But Arenia, you ran into that for a little bit when you were role-playing some Wheel of Time D&D, where it was just like, if you actually think about it and use the power in the way it's possible to use it, it very quickly breaks the D&D game.
Yeah, the one power is super OP, if you actually think about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like many of them are Wanda from WandaVision, Wanda Maximoff.
You have to cripple her with grief.
Something.
Because
otherwise because she's a Nexus being, she can exist in all realities as the same and is aware of them all. That's why you have to keep killing the Phoenix. she's OP. You can't have Jean Grey around forever because she just would be like, Thanos, like he's gone. You know, I just wiped out a whole planet. Why not?
I like how frustrated Egwene is in this chapter. She like repeatedly thinks like, just let it all out. I'm done with this. I'm done. And like, that's me. That's my response to stress, is to just throw it all away. So I always just love how much she's this close. And then she gets back into character and like holds it together like the wise one apprentice she is. But like this one moment, I'm just like, yes, Egwene, let it out. Set it all on fire.
Well, and I love that she kind of comes at the solution here. She's like, a declaration of war only takes the lesser consensus, right? That, and it's like, oh yeah, that's your solution.
I didn't even notice that was in here. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Ramonda had quoted that bloody law as a lecturing a half-wit. Without them, both of them, the lesser consensus lay as far out of reach as the greater. Like, even that declaration of war only required the lesser consensus. So she could not obtain permission, ... It's like, yeah, that's how... That right there is the solution to her problem.
There you go.
Right.
Get them to declare war on Elida and take back your power.
Yeah. Well, and that's Egwene. She's good at... That's why I relate to her so much. I live in a state of constant anger, and then you got to reel that back some and find solutions, and then use the anger to power you through the solution.
If you're not angry, you're not paying attention.
Yes, it's.
I've been angry since before I had the brain power to pay attention, so I don't know where all that came from, but
the whole Bruce Banner thing. I'm always angry. Yeah, and I like that she's frustrated, and she's not just going with emotions with it, and she actually really wants. You can tell she loves the Aes Sedai. She loves what it represents, and she wants it to be the best it can be. And she's frustrated that there are so many who supposedly feel the same way, but are stopping it from being the best it can be.
That is such a relatable mood. We all agree on this. Why can't we do a single thing to do the thing?
Yeah, it's politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was definitely a tough situation that she was in with Nicola, because she had just finished talking about, internally about how talented Nicola is and how she could do so many things, and yet she tries to blackmail and threaten the Amyrlin. She, in most of those situations, should have had extreme punishment, a lot farther than a scolding.
Well, and in some ways, Nicola is almost like a mirror of Egwene, sort of what Egwene could have been if she hadn't followed into a very specific set of circumstances, like similar sort of power level, and Nicola has that ambition and wants to be what Egwene is, but Egwene's like, you don't want to go through what I went through, Right. There's a similar thing with Perrin when he goes back to the Two Rivers, when the lads are like, oh, if only we'd been selected to go with you, and I think Tam turns to them and goes, you wouldn't have wanted to go. You don't want to have gone through what these boys have gone through to get where they are. Like, they are traumatized, Egwene included. Like, this forcing, that was abused by the Seanchan, that she basically barely survived. And in a lot of ways, I say didn't survive. Because if there's any justification for why Egwene dies at the end of the series, it's that she never escapes the trauma of being Damane. And it haunts her to the point where she finds an escape. And that's a little bit of my own headcanon, that it's partially Gawain's death.
What's the inability to process trauma? And that is a realistic outcome. If you don't process your trauma or try to acknowledge it in healthy ways, it does eat people alive, and some
lead to self-sacrifice.
Right.
Yeah.
Some with drug use, some with, whatever your method may be.
And the One Power is a great analogy for drug use, right?
It's addictive.
And doing too much of it will kill you in both situations. And there is that euphoric feeling you get when you're doing it,
Right. And she overdoses, and essentially.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
The way that she goes. Well, this is how Jordan came up with the idea in Vietnam. And he came back, and his way of coping with his trauma was writing these books. So, and that's from Alan. It was his mechanism, and a lot of the characters represent all those different methods.
And the successes or non-successes therein.
Right.
And the pieces and parts of him and the people around him, and having met a lot of them you can see where some of the character personalities come from.
Yeah.
Wilson, who we recently lost, he was who Matt was based after, and he was such the embodiment of Matt in, I think, in his core personality, like his, and that's who what I liked about Matt. Charming and charismatic and adventurous and a little bit dangerous and willing to just take leaps of faith, but also soldier-like and rigid and, in the right ways. And Wilson was, of course, different, but
yeah. And I really see that. We interviewed him at JordanCon, and so I got a chance to talk to him. And episode 100, if you want to go listen.
It's a good episode.
Yeah, it's a great episode, and I went back and listened to it recently, and I totally see that little the slightly mischievous twinkle in his eye. That
it wasn't slight. He had a big twinkle.
A big twinkle.
I
mean, we were interviewing him at 3 a.m. outside the dance floor when we were all very, very drunk. So that's and that's the kind of person he was, is the kind of person who would be outside of a dance hall at 3 a.m. More than happy to talk about.
Well, he loved people. Stuff. He loved life. But I think the major difference with him and Matt is that he was extremely dedicated to his family and very loving father and husband, and he just adored his wife and his
and I think
daughter.
Matt would have eventually been as well. Like, once he married Tuon, he very much adored her and would have been a dedicated father and
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, as he grew up. Maybe. I don't know. I think what bothered me about him the most in the series is that he was so self-centered so often, and that he only begrudgingly helped people. He begrudgingly, got forced into situations where he had to do something. In his perspective, he could have walked away, but he felt like, I'm obligated to do this. But he didn't do it like Rand or Perrin, especially Perrin, where it was the right thing to do.
Whereas I would argue that Matt was always going to do the right thing, but had to make up a scenario in his head where he was forced to do it because, God forbid, he be a hero. And so he, in his own head, is coming up with this, like, bullshit reason as to why he's forced to do it. When in reality, he's jumping in, eyes open, feet first, head first, whatever you want to call it, into the situation, when he could walk away at any time. I mean, everything from leading the band of the Red Hand to rescuing the Sea Folk Aes Sedai, or the Sea Folk channelers, to rescuing the Aes Sedai. Like, all of that stuff is things he could have walked away from at any time. Hell, even going into the Stone, he didn't have to do that, Tracking down, what's his name, who Ravine sent after Elaine.
Komar.
Yeah, Komar. And killing Komar. Didn't have to do that. Like, none of these things are obligations. He went, but every time he was forced into one situations, he's thinking to himself, oh, I can't believe I have no choice. And it's like,
yeah, none of us can believe you have no choice, Matt. Nobody's buying that.
Yeah.
Yes, it feels like he's being forced into that, but I think some of that is, again, going back to unreliable narrator.
Right.
Right.
Well, and at the end, I think he really comes into his own, that he's like, no, this is my skill set. This is what I'm good at. Mm-hmm. I'm going to help manage this battle. I'm going to help, make things happen, because it would be a waste for me not to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Egwene is here.
Mm-hmm.
She's going, look, this is my skill set. These are my abilities, my connections. Why aren't we using them? You've shelved somebody with all of this ability, and it's a waste. And the Aes Sedai are right in a way of saying, proceed with caution. But it's the juxtaposition throughout the ages always of older people and younger people, and how younger people are going to try and push the envelope, and older people are going, settle down, have patience,
Protect my wealth.
It's funny, too, in this scene with Nicola, because Nicola's making that argument to Egwene. Like, you're shelving me. I have all these skills. I have all these attributes. Why are you not using me? And Egwene has to be like, settle down, child. Like, you're not actually as qualified as you think you are. And she's like, but I'm older than you.
And also, she's basically saying, you're going to be a good tool later. I don't want to break you now.
Right.
Because I need you fully trained. I need you powerful. And I'm not going to force you the way I was forced.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which then Nicola dies because she refuses to take that advice and sit back and wait to become one of the most powerful Aes Sedai of the Fourth Age. She just held it together for like 3 more months. But no, she has to rush in and get herself killed.
And takes Ariana with her.
Yeah, and it's again an allegory to painting, I mean, to parenting, to parenting, and how you try to do the best with your kids that you can, and how you try to guide them, and you want to give them the space to grow, but you also want to make it safe, and you don't want to stifle them, but you don't want them to get ahead of themselves and put themselves in situations that are dangerous. If you don't explain those things, sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes it doesn't even if you do.
Yeah, and the Aes Sedai are not big on explanations, right? They are not great parents as an institution.
No, they're awful parents, and I think Egwene is coming in and going, look, you're going to scar your children if you keep doing this. We have new children, let's not scar them. So she's trying to be a better parent, but realizing that it's hard.
Yeah,
it's not easy. And there are times that, you make mistakes. And I think Nicola is one of those times that if she had treated Nicola like her younger self better, and had a more in-depth conversation and maybe took her under her wing more,
tame that zeal,
she would have not gone the other way. But then again, if she did, she might have gotten a big head on her shoulders, like, "Ooh, the Amerlin's taking a shine to me, and I'm pet. Special," and that would make the other novices jealous. And
I don't know if there is a good solution to Nicola and Arena. I think they're just sort of destined to be a problem, because Nicola's really strong-minded and strong-powered. Like, there's no authority figure I think that she would respect.
Yeah, but I wonder if maybe Egwene had set somebody watching over her.
Right. If she had given somebody to be under her wing, I think she would have learned to respect. And I think she would have, if she would have realized that it's not so much an entitlement problem, and that it's a learning how to do it right. If you're going to learn how to do it right.
Right. Right. And safely.
Situation. Right. It's like chemistry with a bunch of kids in a class. Like, you want them to learn chemistry, but you want them not to, burn themselves with acid or the building.
Yeah, or here's a really narrow bridge to cross, right? You don't need to sprint across it. I did, but like a lot of people who sprint across it fall.
I do want to ask, speaking of the sprinting, is that thing about forcing? Swan apologizes to Egwene for forcing that. When the hell does that happen?
I think in the tower when she was a novice.
In the 4 months that we don't get to see of training.
Well, she sends her on missions. She gives her more responsibilities. I think I remember her saying internally that she was pushing Egwene more than she would any other novice, because she knew her potential and she knew how fast they needed to get going with things.
There's a statement at some point she makes that she says, and I have no idea where this is, and so I could be wrong about it, but that she knew when she sent Egwene out into the world that to survive, she would be forced.
I thought that was forced to lie about being Aes Sedai.
I think it was also forced in this way.
I never picked that up.
I could be wrong about that, but that's a quote that's in my head somewhere.
I've always thought of the Shanchan, like you said, Ariel, earlier, like the Shanchan is the forcing, right? Like that's really where the forcing happens, but there's zero reason to think that Swan would apologize about that, unless you're right about her.
I think it's her guilt of sending Egwene out into the world, and that whatever that she knows that sending her out was going to cause this sort of forcing to happen, whether or not she knew it was going to be through the Shanchan or some other.
She knew that she was going to have to do things that were going to be out of her skill set to survive, and she knew that she would be in danger. She kind of gave her carte blanche to do things like, I'm not going to say you can't say you're an Aes Sedai, but I'm not going to really punish you if you do, because you're going to need to get around. So it's okay if you pretend to be Aes Sedai, just don't tell me. And I mean, try to think of it as she wouldn't have sent any other novice out in the world the way that she did, or asked her to do the things that she did, or asked Nynaeve to do the things that she did.
Yeah, why not have double meanings or triple meanings with Swan and Egwene? Of course, that makes sense.
It's her basically stealing those important years of childhood where you're supposed to take it slow to learn, and saying, okay, you got to go get a job. You got to go be an adult. You got to go do these things and pay your taxes and stuff. way too early, and you don't get to have that time.
This Aes Sedai child labor is what you're saying.
Basically. Oh, well, I mean, they do have child labor.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's true. Literal children doing actual labor.
She definitely did force her, I think, and she didn't give her the time to grow because she recognized there wasn't the time, just as Moraine didn't.
Right. So then Egwene is saying, no, I'm Nicola. I'm not going to send you out into the world with carte blanche to blow things up and wave a ring around, because that's a terrible plan. I want you to have your actual Aes Sedai childhood and learn properly.
Right. She's trying to be protective, but not realizing that, there's some people that you just can't save from themselves. I do think that she should have punished Nicola more or given some consequences, but what could she have done that would have been effective or better?
I don't know, but I feel like Ariana is the missing piece of how to manage Nicola. Nobody ever tries to approach Nicola through Ariana, and yet Ariana is like there constantly and is a problem and was like idolizing Brigida. Like, maybe try talking to the warder girlfriend.
Right.
Concept. Maybe try to teach her a little bit about what it means to be a Gaidin and keep her Aes Sedai from killing herself.
Right. Or, have her train with the other Gaiden and have them, they should have had a situation where they were training more of them. They had enough new potential Aes Sedai that they were going to need more Gaiden. So
yeah, like, why not have weapons classes for anyone who might potentially end up as a Gaidin? And I do think,
because women can't be Gaidin.
Women can't fight either.
Right. But I mean, that's the
right
sure.
At
this point, Brigida is the only female Gaidin, and nobody knows about her yet.
Right.
So of course Ariana's not going to be.
But Egwene is the Emerlin, and she already thinks a lot of these rules are dumb, and that is one that I think that she would easily have been like, oh, that's silly. If you want to be a guardian of somebody.
And it does end up changing.
Yeah.
Are Nicola and Ariana supposed to be a couple, like in a relationship?
I can't see any other interpretation.
Right?
I just can't.
I assume so. I mean, either that or they were like super best friends, but
like,
because it
talks about how she idolizes Brigida and gets super jealous, and then she doesn't seem to have any interest in anything except flirting in a rather forward manner, though not lately.
Yeah,
they're bonded now.
So I think when they first met, Ariana was absolutely going after Brigida and got kind of rejected, sort of the puppy dog-ishness.
Yeah, it was an idol hero worship.
Yeah, exactly. But also, like, absolute huge crush.
Yes, yes. And Brigida was like, child, no.
Yeah.
You are too pretty, too young, and too female.
Talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then that then transferred over to her best friend, and they became intimate at that point. Once they got to Saladar, and Brigida made it clear that she was not with him.
Which means that Nicola, for all of her amazingness, is still the second option on Arena's radar.
Well, and the thing is, like, TC was pointing out that, I think it's not just about the Gaiden training, the warder training is not just about weapons. It's about how to protect your Aes Sedai politically and through guidance and counseling.
Mm-hmm.
They're their number one counselor.
I think.
And how do you explain Gawain?
That doesn't mean it was a good one.
No, we do get.
I love that. You have the greatest just like look on your face when you're like, "Are you kidding me?"
I just like him very much. It's probably one of my least favorite characters.
Yeah, but to your point about the channeling thing, even Lan tells Nynaeve about, like, here's a warning sign with your channeling. You're channeling too much. I know, because I was bonded to like an actual professional for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, it's any long-term relationship. You're around somebody long enough, you pick up their signs of them pushing themselves or the physical cues.
You also learn more about their job than you really want to.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's what's going on with Lan, where he's like, I didn't want to know anything about the power, but I was with someone who was wielding it on a daily basis for 20 years. I picked up a few things, right? Like,
right.
I may not be a channeler.
Right. Like, I know what exhaustion looks like, and I know that's bad for you. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably the only way Nicola could have been salvaged, is if Arena had been respected as a Gaidin and told the only way you keep your partner is if you
Right.
keep her alive.
Separating the two of them and putting a heavy hand on the training of Nicola and a heavy hand on the training of Ariana as a guiding, and like actually having them come up through the ranks.
Because we've just got blackmail, 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 blackmail.
Yeah, it ends with blackmail.
Yeah.
Her heading back alone in the dark again after being blackmailed and physically threatened.
Yeah, because my authority is so scary to them that they definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they learned their lesson. I scolded them. Like,
Yes. It's not smart.
No. And this chapter ends with her sending everybody away, and the next chapter opens with her walking back into the tent, so she must have wandered back alone.
Drawing a deep breath, Egwene folded her hands at her waist. Clutched together, they would not tremble. All but cowering, the pair looked suitably chastened. She hoped those downcast eyes and slumped shoulders and shifting feet were not feigned. By rights, she should send them to Tiana right now. She had no idea what the penalty might be for trying to blackmail the Amerlin seat, but it seemed likely that being turned out of the camp would be the least of it. In Nicola's case, the turning out would have to wait until her teachers were satisfied she knew enough of channeling to not hurt herself or others by accident. Nicola Treehill would never be an Aes Sedai, though, once that charge was laid against her, all that potential would go for nothing. Except any woman caught pretending to be Aes Sedai was set down so hard she would still be whimpering years later, and an accepted caught might very well consider the other woman fortunate. But surely Nynaeve and Elaine were safe now they were really sisters. Herself as well. Only it might take no more than a whisper of this to erase any chance of making the Hall acknowledge her truly the Amerlin seat. As well jaunt off to Rand and then tell the Hall to their faces. She dared not allow these two to see her doubt, or even suspect. "I will forget this," she said sharply, "but if I hear so much as a whisper of it again, from anyone." She drew a ragged breath. If she heard shouts of it, there might be little she could do. But by the way they jumped, they read a threat that pricked deep. "Get to your beds before I change my mind." In an instant, they became a flurry of curtsies, of "Yes, mother," and "No, mother," and "As you command, mother." They scurried away, looking back over their shoulders at her, every step faster than the last, until they were running. She had to walk on sedately, but she wanted to run too.
That was good.
I'm getting more into it. I actually was reading out loud to my husband the other night because I was reading this and reading Broken Earth, and it's like, all right, I guess we can get back into Dune. So getting my reading voice and remembering to slow down and articulate the T's because it doesn't sound nearly as awkward to the audience as it does in my head.
You know, she does the best that she can in that moment. Like, she thinks that she's scolded them enough and that they get the point, and she is worried about it, and it would undermine her if it was whispers that she had pretended, because people don't care about the reasoning if you broke a rule.
I love that line. If she heard shouts of it, there might be little she could do. Like, whispers are one thing, but if everyone's shouting it from the rooftops, like, she might be in serious trouble. And she acknowledges that. Like, this is a real problem and a stumbling block. And it informs a lot of what she tells Nynaeve and Elaine. Yeah. Right? Don't come back. Like, this whole... she initiates a whole conversation, obviously about Moghedien, but about other things, too. We could talk about the frustration, not communication. Well, I think part of the reason is she doesn't want them coming back because of this. So this, again, we're keeping a lot of characters in separate. She can't go see Rand. These characters can't go visit her. Like, we have to have reasons for these people not to be popping back and forth in gateways to go visit each other.
She wants them to be safe, and she is being so caring about everyone around her, but not thinking about herself and her own safety. And that's pretty much Egwene throughout until her end.
That's true. That's true. Self-sacrificing to a fault.
It's actually kind of amazing she lives as long as she does.
Yeah. Right. She could have died that night. But she's a lot like Rand in that way. And she's attributing, honestly, the way that she acts to him being overbearing and a bully. But she has to do the same thing, and it's not there's a lot of not putting themselves in each other's shoes. I think it's frustrating. But it is understandable.
Especially since they share so many responsibilities.
Right.
They're both more than kings, more than queens, right? They are the authority
Amerlin
that controls
and Tamerlin.
Kingdoms. Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like there's a word for that.
There's Old Tongue for that.
Yeah.
She had to just scold Nicola and Ariana there and then, but I think it would have been a fine line to dance to try and cultivate her after the fact, because if she had shown too much favoritism, it would have negated the scolding and the threat. But at the same time, without doing it, it was left too open-ended for her to do well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'll show her.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
it was really fun talking with you.
Yeah,
it was. Talking with you. Yeah, I love deep dives.
Oh yeah,
we'll have you back. I'm sure.
Said the attention to detail, definitely. Yeah, we've got you coming back. We have you scheduled for another episode, so that's of course. And hopefully, I will see you at JordanCon. We both have mostly committed to being there, I think.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I will be there. Barring any unfortunate circumstances. So I look forward to it. Hopefully, I mean, it'll be small. That's okay.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you not being like, well, you're no longer attached to the Wheel of Time, so you're dead to me.
That's not why you're dead to me.
I will be from what I worked on and what I did, and still love the books. So
absolutely. No, and we just what I love to do is have people on here who love the books and want to talk about them. That's all we want,
Yeah. Well, if anybody is interested in continuing to follow what I am working on, Patreon is a great place, and that's patreon.com/ArielBurgess.
And that's 1 G and 2 S's?
Yes, 2 S's, 1 G.
Everyone go support artists.
Yeah, you can find all my links on my website, which is just artistarielburgess.com. My print shop is there, my Patreon links, and there's a page dedicated to all that stuff and missions, and you can see all my galleries and look at not only my Wheel of Time stuff, but all my other stuff, missions and sketches.
They're all very pretty.
There's a lot of really great fantasy art on there that's just fun to look at.
Thanks. Well, the stuff on the website's lower quality than on Patreon, but
yeah, you go to Patreon and look at it there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Has always been like just the defining art, right? And like it's been like, I'm not a very visual thinker when I read books for some reason, so like your art helps so much because I'm like, I need a picture of what's happening. And one of my favorite ones of yours, I know you said it isn't your favorite, but the Miracle or the Dragonmount's Revenge.
Oh yeah,
one of my favorite ones like ever, just because it's such a difficult to envision scene and you envisioned it.
At some point want to redo that one. The original sketch that I had, they wanted to stick to more like a faraway view, but what I originally wanted to do was the linked group in the background, and the very foreground was all of the Trollocs running from the lava and it spewing out and like eating them as they ran. And I wanted it to be like really dynamic and have the sketch of it. It's super cool, but they were like, this is too much, we want to pull out and have a bird's eye view of like how big it was. And I was like, okay, so I did that. That's why it's not my favorite, because I like the sketch more.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll go back, because it's a lot of work for something that I can't really do anything with, but I still love the series, and I still like get the itch to go work on more. Like I was telling Seth when I read this chapter over again, I was like, oh, I want to paint Egwene like sturdily walking through the camp, like thinking about everything, or her at her desk in her tent, the moment that Suan and Lean leave, like
Well, and that brings up one of my favorite art pieces, which is the transition art pieces, specifically of Egwene.
Right.
And how did you end up coming up with that concept? Because I feel like that's very unique. Maybe it's something I haven't seen before, but the half of where they started and then the half of where they ended up.
Well, to answer your question about the transition posters, I couldn't fall asleep one night, which is usual. And often as I start to actually fall asleep, I'll get like a quick mental image of something. And often it's something I haven't thought about. So they're usually painting ideas. And I've been reading the books, and I just had this image of Rand standing in fire and the fire burning away who he was into the dragon, and how there's still this boy who from Edmondsfield who cares and has empathy and wants to do things, and then he's wrestling with sacrificing himself and this stern person that he has to become, and this scary figure, and the weight of that responsibility. And I wanted to show like how heavy that burden was. So if you ever zoom up to it, there's a tear coming down his chin. And I wanted to do like all the little details and stuff. And so that started with the Rand. And I think Matt was the second one I did. And everybody was like, oh my God, do Baron, do Egwene, do Nynaeve. And it was really fun doing them, but they started, they started taking longer and longer as I was getting better at high quality, like realism. And I think Moraine took the longest. She took through like the whole winter break. I finished her, I think, in January. And I think Lan, who I have him back there, but you can't really see him. Lan and probably Egwene were my favorites. Egwene has kind of my face. And if you look at a lot of her pictures, she has my face because she's 5 foot, I'm 5 foot. She has big dark brown eyes and we have a very similar personality. So I was like, well, I'm kind of an easy reference figure.
Yeah.
I can make angry faces. So I have from like the calendar piece that I did where she's in the middle of killing Taim right before she sacrifices herself. She's like screaming. And so I have all these pictures of myself being like, because Gawain had just died. And so again, she's got tears streaming down her face. And it's a lot easier to look at yourself than to get a model to do it, especially if they're not an actor.
Mm-hmm.
The transition pieces just came out of that, and then community involvement, and there's lots and lots of little hidden gems in all of them, like Matt's signet ring, and on Lan's belt is a lock of Nynaeve's hair and the coin that Maureen gave him. I just was like, I'm gonna put this in there, and one day somebody's gonna like message me and be like, I saw it, and I'll be really happy that one person caught it. So
I have the Egwene transition poster positioned so I can see it when I'm at my desk, partially because I like looking at it, and partially because I realize that sometimes I'm on video calls with people who are still working their way through the series. I was like, oh no, I can't have spoilers in like my office background.
Oh yeah, those pieces are so spoilery.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay on this podcast. That's for sure.
For sure. But it's like, you've got,
Sometimes we pop up on other podcasts, so you don't want to have it like right there.
You don't want the crystal eating her.
Right, yeah. And I still have the High Priestess that you did for the Incomplete Tarot set. That one's still in a tube because I haven't like framed it yet. But someday I will have Angry Nynaeve as the High Priestess staring down at me. That
I love that one. That was one of the last projects that I was going to do with Tavern Teas, and we were talking about doing a tarot card deck for a long time. It was one of the biggest requested things I got over and over and over and over.
Can imagine.
But it's a 72 card deck.
Yeah.
And that's
major and minor arcana.
Yeah. And I had everybody mapped out. I had every card assigned. And I was starting to do it, but then, we couldn't finish. And so I was like, I'm just going to do the ones I was most excited about. And so I did 7 of them and released. I think that was my last official release for the series, was those tarot card posters.
Yeah, so shout out your Patreon.
Yeah, it's patreon.com/Ariel Burgess. It's a great community where you can see all of my art. You get to get my brushes. You can get like wallpapers, tutorials, phone wallpapers, and I just share like what I'm going through and what I'm making. And there's a lot of stuff that I put there that I don't share on the rest of all my social media. And if I'm quiet on social media, I'm usually still active on there and doing stuff. But
and I've been a Patreon, and I enjoy the content.
But there's
quite
lots
a
of
bit.
good art that never goes anywhere else. You just see it on Patreon.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, it's fun, and I love getting my patrons' opinions. So I love what you guys do, because making the cards, that was one of the most fun parts. Was like the community conversation that happened, where people would say, what if you had men like this and pose like this with the book that she was reading, and what if you have like, I imagine her as this actor, I imagine her as this actor, or people who would tell me what they envision, and then I could kind of combine all of that with my mental image and would make it. And so many people came to me and still come to me and say, like, that's them. That's what they look like. And it's because I listen to people. You know?
Yeah, I mean, your images have been my headcanon for these characters ever since I saw them. I mean, there was a period of time where before you were doing the art where I was reading the books, and I don't think I had much of a headcanon for what they looked like, you know? And then to see them on the page and see the physicalness there, it's just such a gift.
Most of my stuff is digital art, but, you know, I did learn traditionally, so.
Yeah, I picked up charcoal. I smeared it all over a page. It's
fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, there's a couple of things I was proud of, but, man, art takes so much hard work and practice to get good. And
yeah, it's often why I say I had no social life. Like, I didn't go to parties in high school, and I didn't have a lot of friends. So, like, I made my own comic books and drew, and you know, just practiced. And I am like self-taught, but I say that in quotes because my mother and my grandmother were both art directors, and both my parents were artists, and both grandmothers were painters and artists. So, I mean, I grew up around being critiqued and told what to do, and I did actually go to college and get the most of an illustration degree. I'm an associate's. I'm like missing one semester of getting that, but I stopped because I was in the middle of getting published with The Wheel of Time and felt kind of silly finishing it.
Like, I've made it. We're done.
Yeah, well, in part I wasn't I was at like community college, and I didn't feel very challenged. But I was also getting a web design degree at the same time as well, so I was getting 2 associates. So I went, web design is a good moneymaker. I never use it.
I was gonna say web design was a good moneymaker, but man, the internet has changed in the last 10 years.
Oh yeah. By the time I was graduating, they were like, you also need to be a web programmer, and I was like, math, not my thing. I'm a huge X-Men nerd. In case
I didn't know that. I haven't seen any X-Men art come out.
Yeah, I well, again, it's the whole sales thing. Can't sell it, but I'd have tons of, like, in my sketchbooks, like Phoenix and fan art and stuff. Jean Grey is probably my all-time #1 favorite character ever, and I have really strong dyslexia, so reading comics was kind of how I got into reading.
You say, what did you think about, like, the Dark Phoenix movies and stuff? That was a great look.
We don't talk about X-Men 3. It doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
Second of all, I was actually kind of begrudgingly being okay with the First Class universe. If you look at it as a multiverse kind of thing, they had a lot more accuracy to the comic books than as compared to, like, the early Bryan Singer movies, which had almost none. They were like, here are the characters and kind of what they look like. Forget everything else. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, so I had a lot of trouble reading when I was a kid, and comic books was how I got into actually being able to read and getting into being able to read novels like this. And I still really struggle. It takes me a very, very long time to read a novel. So that's why I didn't read many books this past year. But yeah, you try to take movie stuff with a grain of salt. So there were some things that I was like, well, yeah, that was kind of accurate. And that was almost shot for shot similar to the Phoenix Saga. That specifically, that arc, the Phoenix Saga, is what I started on with X-Men. Okay. And then going back, and, you know, there was the 90s cartoon, which was awesome.
Yeah, I watched the hell out of that, yeah.
Yeah, Saturday mornings were the best.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, fantastic opening.
Absolutely.
Next to Gargoyles, not the best, but one of the best openings ever for cartoons. You have to do those kinds of things with these characters, and I feel like Jordan is doing that with Egwene because she is a Wanda Maximoff, Jean Grey type character. She is that powerful, and her end shows that. And the same thing with Nynaeve. You have to put these handicaps on them so they don't just and there are no more problems, And
it needs a little more obvious on hers. That block is like a very obvious block of power,
Right. And it's realistic. A lot of us get on our own way, and we have these coping mechanisms that we rely on to get through life. And I think that is part of why the Aes Sedai, and they mention it, part of why they don't want older women, older channelers, because they have created those mental blocks. They've started, it's like getting diagnosed with a disability or a learning disability or a mental one when you're much older. You've already learned coping mechanisms that are part of your functioning.
Yeah.
And so being able to undo those things is much harder than just never learning them in the first place.
That's fair.
Yeah, but we've got a bunch of Aes Sedai teaching coping mechanisms instead of helping with
Exactly.
the problems. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
older women adds more maturity to the mix. And so you have, supposedly, you know, age doesn't always equal maturity, but you're more likely to get a little more steady-headedness so you can get better problem solving.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?